All right, we'll go ahead and get started. First, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Stewart. I am the Director of Solutions Engineering for Accedian for the North America market. I'm actually based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and today what we're going to go over is, as the title says, stop drinking from the fire hose, make data and KPIs work for you. Uh, the goal here is to really talk about, there's a lot of KPIs out in the network, and how can you make those work for you, make them into actionable events, and what you can do with those type of KPIs. So first, one of the things is, we want to talk about, just kind of set the groundwork here. Data is not the issue, right? There's tons of data out there today. And when we're doing a lot of work with customers, one of the things they always talk about, hey, there's a lot of data out there. What do we do with the data? Every device and piece of software produces data. There's all kinds of different data, right? There's network performance data with KPIs, and we'll talk about it a little more for your networks, whether it's delay, latency, jitter, those type things. There's also equipment KPIs for things like health, CPU utilization, memory utilization, maybe even temperature if they're overheating, those type things. And then, some of the networks we deal with even look at things like weather KPIs, whether it's temperature, humidity, whether it's storms and those type things, right? So everyone produces KPIs, and the goal of those KPIs are, it's in the right frame, right, to help everybody out, right? And it's important to have those KPIs. But as the industry started adding more and more KPIs, as the networks become more heterogeneous, there's a lot of different things and impacts with all those different KPIs. So it's great to have all these KPIs, but there are a couple of problems with the KPIs and this data. One is a lot of the data is siloed, right? So this data, is good, but if something happens, I might go look at my network KPIs, and maybe I'll go look at what the KPIs are around a piece of equipment, or maybe in some cases we have people bring in weather KPIs. It's all siloed, right? And one of the things here is there's no inherent relationship between the data, right? So what does that mean, right? Really understanding the impact and the relationship to understand the signatures of what causes issues in the network is very important, right? So single KPIs, there's a lot of flooding of data. There's even tools out there to help you bring even more data with things like data lakes and those type things. But the data is only as good as it can tell a story, right, and give you a complete view of what's going on. So one of the things that we talk a lot about with our customers is that the basic KPIs tell a story, but they don't tell the complete story. So if we just back up and take a look at the problem, right? So the number of KPIs within a network, everybody's producing KPIs, right? And so each point in that network, from point A to Z, you're creating a lot of KPIs. And once again, these KPIs are very valuable, right? They help you understand at that point in time what's going on in the network, right? But if you start looking at, just did a simple calculation here, every network produces 60 KPIs every network point produces 60 KPIs every 5 minutes. And let's say there's 2,000 points, in that day period. That's about 172.8 million KPIs are produced in a day. So that's a lot of information, right? And in the past, a lot of people have talked about using SNMP, and you get all these different alarms, and you might set threshold on these KPIs, and that generates a lot of different alarms. But once again, even by just looking at alarms, it can overwhelm you what's going on. And once again, a lot of these alarms are siloed and they're single point from where that data comes in. So you can see there's a large number of KPIs, and really where the industry's going, that number is not going to get smaller, right? That number is actually going to get larger because everybody's into telemetry streaming. We need to produce as much data as we can out of each point. Once again, all for good reasons, right? It's very important to have that data. But the raw KPIs does create a lot of data, and this kind of creates the fire hose that we see a lot of operators and NOCs and engineering groups are drinking from. Another thing that's important is the granularity of which you get the KPIs, right? So some people do things on a 5-minute interval, 10-minute interval, and a 15-minute interval. And that's fine, right? You can help reduce some of that data by taking larger gaps in the granularity which you collect that data. But also that means with those gaps, there's no visibility, right? So things can get masked off and hidden. And as we go into things where we're having to support higher speed business services or 5G or 5G backhaul, those type things, and you start getting things like ultra low latency or ultra high bandwidth, those gaps really don't allow you to understand what's going on. So, you got a number of KPIs, there are going to be more of those, trying to balance that with the granularity, but the granularity is going to become more important as you get into higher speed, applications and more critical applications as you get into things like 5G. That granularity actually now creates even more KPIs, which is important, right? And the last thing is really the relationship of the KPIs to a service, right? So one of the things that we talk about, we see things like a single packet KPI loss, but with a single KPI or certain KPIs, it really doesn't tell you what the cause is. At that point, it's kind of telling you, hey, I have an issue. I see an issue, but really also, is it causing an issue with the customer? At the end of the day, it's really about the customer. What impact is that causing the customer? So having that relationship between the KPIs and services is very important, right? And so it's not just about collecting the KPIs, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but it's how do you relate the KPIs across a service end to end at different points and back to the service and the impact that would have on the customer. So this is really just kind of set the stage for the fire hose itself, right? So this is the fire hose. And, really, there's no such thing as basic KPIs. Just as an example, at Accedian, as you get into critical mission networks and high-speed networks and those things, like a delay tells you something, but you actually need to break that KPI into other things. So you'll see things like we do a lot of one-way delay, and we do percentiles and standard deviation, because that starts telling a story. The same thing with packet loss, and also with delay and jitter, those type of things. So your basic KPIs are typically, from a network point of view, are delay, interpacket delay variation or jitter, and loss, right? And so you can see, though, to really understand what's going on, you actually need to break it down to more KPIs to give you things like, for packet loss, what was the loss berth? How long was it? And for delay and interpacket delay variation, it's important to do things like percentiles, like 95th percentile, 96th percentile, because that data alone just in delay might not tell you something, but I need to create more KPIs. So it's important to be able to have a lot of these KPIs that tell you a story. But once again, the KPI itself can overrun you, and once again, then you're drinking out of the fire hose. So it's really important. Okay, I have all these KPIs. I go all the way up to the application layer. I can monitor things like Citrix, HTTP, relate that back. Now, what do I do? What do I do with these KPIs, right? So I was just trying to give you an example where, more and more people are giving you more KPIs for the right reason, right? It's to give you better insight so that you can do something with it. But these are still raw, basic KPIs. I talked about granularity, and really, why does granularity matter, right? It's really about the frequency of which you're measuring things. So here you'll see, we talked earlier about 15-minute sampling versus 5-minute sampling, 1-minute sampling, 5-second sampling. And so as customers get more into things like these critical networks, like for 5G, those type things, the sampling rate and the rate that they're running become more important, right? Because you can see, the 15-minute, a lot of things kind of get glossed over, they get hidden, and you can't really see what's going on. You get down to the 5-second sampling, you can really get more of what's going on with the story, right? So that's important to understand. So really the advantage of the granularity, as I mentioned earlier, was really to give you that capability to fill that gap of visibility, right? So that's very important, right? So once again, as networks become faster, higher speeds, good enough is no longer good enough, right? You got to have that visibility and granularities, but this will create more KPIs. Here's actually a real world example of why granularity counts, right? So this is actually with a real customer, And with the pandemic, there's been a lot of people working from home. There's been a lot of people that are doing school from home. Actually, in my own house, I've got kids that are going to school. I'm working from home, and one of our customers said, "Hey, we need to have a better understanding of what's going on with the network as we provide services to our customers as they're doing more work from home and they're going to school," right? So you'll see in the top graph, this is a very granular measurement where we're doing this at 100 milliseconds. We're taking the max throughput at 100 milliseconds. So we can see this bursty traffic on this network, and it goes up to 20 megabits. But when we look at it on an average, we see they never go over 5 megabits. Well, this is important because as people are starting to do more work from locations like their residential, it gives you an understanding of what's going on, right? So in one example, when we were taking these type measurements, we were able to understand that things created either a packet loss or a packet delay, right? So if the buffer was adequate or too large, we could see not only through this granular burst that there was an increase in delay, which leads to the way this network's been designed for capacity. There's too much a burst buffer committed a CBS buffer, and so it creates the delay that the customer can see. But if it's too small, as you'll see over here in this right-hand side, it actually creates packet loss. So getting this visibility and granularity, and here is now you're starting to see, a single KPI can tell me something. Like I know I have a burst of traffic here, but what does that mean to my customer? So as we're working with our customers, it's important to be able to take a lot of different pieces of this type of data and bring it together. And now I can start creating actionable events. So in the systems, when you're doing this, it's important to be able to take things like the granular measurement, take the packet loss, the latency, and I can start creating signatures and actionable events out of this that will tell you, you know what I'm seeing? I'm seeing packet loss, but at the same time, I'm seeing this very peak bursty traffic, and that association tells me something and allows me to look. Okay, I understand what's going on, how my buffer's set, and those type of things. So this is actually a great example where you go beyond a KPI. If I just looked at each single KPI, it might be overwhelming. But within a system, if I can bring these together, now I have an actionable event that tells me a signature of what's going on that I've seen, and I can take some action on it. So why are things like this, like packet loss, important, right? So this was actually a study that we did with one of our providers, right? So now it's not only just understanding packet loss, but what is that packet loss, the impact it has on the customers, right? And with this customer, one of the things that we found out as we looked at different packet loss and throughput and the customer perception of their service or their experience is when we saw things like the 0.22 packet loss, it actually equated to a 10% decrease in their data throughput, right? So if you think about granularity and how you measure it, it's important to be able to understand, like, 0.22 packet loss, is something that you need to be able to sample fairly often to catch that, because it does have a pretty big impact. We're up to 0.5%. We saw almost a 50% decrease in data throughput, right? Because as you have packet loss, TCP retransmissions, it created issues, right? Same thing with delay. Like if we see like a 5 millisecond delay, that increase, that can go to a 10% decrease in data throughput, right? So understanding these and getting that granularity and be able to associate this data, now make these KPIs work for me, right? It's not really about just the packet loss, but the packet loss and the association of data throughput, so I can create signatures in the network that allow me to understand what's going on, right? So the quality of the transport has a major influence on QoE, right? And packet loss has significant, cause on throughput reduction, right? And this has to do a lot. Most people use TCP, so this has a lot around TCP, right? So there's really important to be able to take these KPIs, associate those KPIs, and understand that impact that it has on customers. The other thing that's really important is a concept that we talk about a lot, that we probably spend most of the time with our customers on, is metadata. So there are a lot of PM systems out there, but a PM system is important to be able to understand the relationship from a KPI to where it sits in the network, where it sits in the service, right? So it's very important that when you're collecting these KPIs, you're actually enriching that data, not with just the KPI itself, but a set of metadata, right? And one of the things I'm showing here is the metadata that is an example of metadata that when we're taking measurements for packet loss or packet delay or delay variation, or that set of KPIs I showed earlier, we also enrich that data to associate that with metadata so you can understand what's going on. And metadata can be as simple as what is the EVC, what VLAN, is there a session ID, all the way down. You can associate that metadata with what equipment it's on, what's the location, latitude, longitude, the cities. The other thing is the path. Even though you might not be getting a KPI from a particular part of the network, if I can start associating that path, then I can start doing some correlation and understanding the impact of what I'm seeing on a single KPI to the rest of the network. And I have an example of that. So it's very important to be able to do that and understand that when you're actually not looking at KPIs, because at the end of the day, it really is about association and impact across that. You can drive that all the way up into regions and into states and even to particular customers, right? So you're able to take a look across that, slice and dice the data in a lot of different ways. That now I'm not drinking from a fire hose. I'll keep coming back to the fire hose analogy, right? But now I can take and slice and dice that data, and I'll show you an example of what that means to slice and dice that data. So if I go into here, I've actually got 4 examples I wanted to run through of not looking at a single KPI, but let's understand the impacts of the KPIs and how you can associate that and really then enrich the data. So the data that gets presented wouldn't be like high packet loss or high utilization. The data that would be enriched and would be an actionable event that say, hey, look, because I had high packet loss, it is based off of high utilization. Now, this is something I can take an action on, right? A high packet loss, maybe not, right? Maybe high utilization, maybe not. But if I'm seeing packet loss and I can create a signature that now helps me understand that, hey, you know what? The reason I'm getting packet loss is because of this high utilization. I'm able to start associating that. And I'll build upon this, right? So, and you can do this with more than just a single KPI. As I showed you earlier, one of the things is the ability to take multiple KPIs, look for multiple events, set different thresholds, and then be able to create new KPIs out of that. That creates actionable events that allow you to do something with it. Once again, I hate to call this data reduction, but it's really how you create actionable events out of those KPIs. We don't want to drink out of the fire hose. We want to make the KPIs work for us based off of signatures that we see so that we can take actions. Because sometimes I might have high packet loss or high utilization. Let me back up. I might have high utilization, but if there's no impact on the network, I don't care, right? That might be a capacity planning issue. But what I really care about is when I had high utilization, what impact in the rest of the network? What did it cause that might be causing my customers issues? Another example is detecting things like control plane issues and impact on the data plane. One of the key things when you want to make the KPIs work for you is to have the ability to do things like baseline and dynamic baseline and understand what's going on. And so here you can see what we did is we actually have 3 different measurements, right? We have delay, packet loss, and utilization. And a lot of people worry about utilization when it peaks very high, but sometimes when utilization drops, that tells you something also. So this, once again, this is another real world example where here we had dynamic baseline threshold, but we didn't just put a high water mark, but we also put a low water mark in there, right? Because that actually tells you something. If there's no traffic going on the network, but the delay and the packet loss look normal, that tells you, okay, the network seems fine, but there must be an issue in here where normal traffic, which is typically over 100 megabits because we baselined it, drops well below that to less than 700 kilobits, right? So now all of a sudden, I can see that something's happening here, right? And this signature would be able to detect that this is typically associated with a control plane issue with this customer, right? So once again, the goal here is you don't look at a single KPI, you look at multiple KPIs, you're able to create maybe new KPIs out of that and create a signature out of that. Now, the important part of this also, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, is I'm showing this all through screenshots, but everything should be accessible through APIs or through a data bus like Kafka. We have some customers use Pulsar, where you can take these actionable events and then push it out to other systems that you might need as alerts or whatever it might be. Another example that, once again, this is another real world example, is today, networks are becoming more dynamic and fluid, right? And baselining is once again, dynamic baselining is very important, right? And so when you make path changes, you do expect to see changes in the behavior. You don't want to see it, but most likely there could be, and most likely those changes are okay because they would still fit within that baseline. So, making the KPIs work for you, I'm baseline, I see a route, that route looks good from A to B, everything's okay. When I make a change, if something happens to a ring or something happens, maybe I switch over wherever you're at, or maybe, if you're already into containers and virtualization, you spin up a new network function, you want to be able to take that data from the new route, understand the impact that the new route had, right? And in this case, it was very simple where we had a baseline and we could actually see a stair step of that. And because we don't just look at single KPIs, we actually look at KPIs, we understand the baseline, we're doing dynamic baseline, and you can see, all right, that route change had an issue, right? So post-network change, the delay actually took a pretty big jump. Now, maybe that delay is acceptable for the time being, so you can go, hey, I'm okay with that, but it does give you visibility to be able to use those KPIs within a baseline manner to say if it's accepted or not, and if you want to keep that route change or not, right? And once again, this is very important to be able to do that, right? And the other part of this is with the metadata, and we talked about the metadata. The metadata can be dynamic also, so I could understand what the route was before and then what the route is afterwards, so I understand what that change and the impact it had when we made that change. And the last example I have was really just understand the impact of events. So you might see a packet loss in a particular part of the network, but what impact will that have on the rest of the network? So this comes back to enriching your data with things like metadata. Metadata is very important because now I can see that where I had packet loss in point A of the network, and oh, by the way, points B, C, and D are associated with that, so they're going to have the same impact. So this now allows me to do association to understand, I don't really have 5 different issues. I have a single issue, and it's at this point, this is the common point in the network, so this is really where the issue is, and this allows you to eliminate a lot of data that you might have to weed through or look at, a lot of different events that might be thrown with that. So once again, not drinking from the fire hose, but using things like metadata, association, really getting down to the root cause of the issue or where things are from a performance point of view to understand what's going on. So for us, just to talk about what we do a little bit in a couple of slides, is we actually at Accedian, we have a product called Skylight Performance Analytics. And so really what we do is we actually can ingest a lot of different data, analyze large volumes, because our goal is to take, we'll drink the fire hose, but then what our goal is really to produce those actionable events and insights from this data, so our customers don't have to drink from the fire hose, right? And so we'll leverage things like machine learning, AI techniques to do that, right? And really, what we want to be able to do is just provide information to either your NOCs or your systems or those type things that then you can take, take those actionable events and then take action on them without having to weed through a lot of traffic and cut out on a lot of time for what it takes to do that. And just really the way we do that, just to give you a quick overview of this, is it is a cloud native approach that we use. We do have a very strong data cleaning mechanism. I talked about the baseline, and it's really a dynamic baselining. One of the key things here is not only can we easily bring in our data, but we can bring in data from third party. We actually use a microservice approach to allow us to easily ingest other data, because it's important. Once again, the goal here is to not drink from the fire hose, right? So the more data you can aggregate, the more you can create actionable events, those type things, that's very important. So one of the things is that's what we've done. Another important part of this is really the ability to get that data out, right? So to have the ability to interact with, it's one thing to reduce the data, but you got to be able to do something with that data, whether you do it through our system, but we understand there's other systems out there where you might want to use that, right? So in that case, we use things like where you can use like RESTful APIs. We actually use a standard called Open API that allows you to easily integrate to APIs to get information, or we can use a data bus architecture, like I said, like things like Kafka to push that out. So hopefully, what I wanted to go through here was the importance of ways to reduce data, not drink from the fire hose, to create action events, to really at the end of the day is make everybody's job easier, right? So everybody has 20 long poles. So if you can start eliminating some of those long poles by letting tools like ours do that, that's really, really the goal here and stuff. So.